Should you read Rook Exodus? There are always so many new comics coming out, and you may be curious about some of them and wonder, are they for you? Today's outing, Rook Exodus. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and today let's go where our whims take us, which happens to be looking at Rook Exodus. So, what is Rook Exodus? Rook Exodus is part of Ghostmachine, a creator-owned imprint spearheaded by Geoff with multiple co-founders. The focus being on creator-owned IPs and universes, but also with business control. We talked a bit about that when we looked at Junkyard Joe, so if you missed that, link down below. The Ghostmachine line, time of recording, is being published through Image, whom they also cite as an inspiration for breaking off and doing your own thing. Beginning of this, even before Ghostmachine, started with Geiger, which launched the Unnamed Universe. And as of 2023, with the founding of Ghostmachine, the concept has expanded to include 4 universes, although they could intermingle at some point. The universes are the Unnamed Universe, the Hyde Street Universe, the Family Odysseys Universe, and the one we're going to take a look at, the Rook Exodus Universe. The universes were showcased in Ghostmachine #1 in January of 2024, which was a teaser showcase of what would be coming out in the line. You don't need to read that to get into Rook Exodus issue 1, and the snippet reads better after you've read the first issue of the comic. But there is a bit of world building information in there that is handy to know, but you can get by without it. Just if you end up liking the comic, you'll probably want it. Rook Exodus is by Geoff and Jason Fabok. Fabok on art, Brad Anderson on colors. This creative team was featured together on the 3 Jokers, which we've talked about a decent amount on this channel. So if you like the look of that, you already know a bit of what you're gonna get, at least art-wise, with this comic. What is Rook Exodus about? This series can very much be a little let down by the ways in which it can be described. The succinct version at times doesn't really do it justice. So I'll give a slightly more expanded synopsis, but not a spoilery one, unless knowing anything about the story at all is spoilers, in which case, then slight spoilers. The base premise, as it has been presented in the first 2 issues and the teaser, is that the corporate-owned planet known as Exodus, owned by Better World, has suffered a failing of its world engine, which was the mechanism which controlled the terraforming required to maintain the planet. As a result, everybody who could leave did. The corporation promised to return, repair the engine, and they are MIA. At this point, it's been a couple of years since they left. The story focuses on the battles on the planet between those who remain, with a particular eye on people known as wardens. These are people who worked for the company to control the animal population of the planet, utilizing a neural network and themed helmets, because it looks cool. These links between the humans and the animals were meant to be very much one-directional, but that is clearly not the case. There's a lot more bleed back than anticipated. Our protagonist is Rook, who controls the core of his family of birds, which includes crows, ravens, and of course rooks. He's desperate to leave the planet. His core motivation is that he wants to get off. When we first meet him, he's building a spaceship, while some others wish to stay, some to try to build a society in the ever-devolving planet, others to rule over it. So that's what's going on. So how is it? Well, let's start with the story. The story is well laid out and easy to follow. You're provided with most of the information you need to know, and the rest is presented as a bit of a mystery, but one that you want to find out, potentially, or some of it is a bit fill in the blanks. The story also quickly lays out stakes. The world is dying, water is drying up, the animals are mutating through either genetic modification or adapting to the planet's natural habitat it is reverting to, or both. People are desperate to leave. It feels desolate, but not joyless. The isolation reflects both the world and the main character's mental state. Back on Earth, I was the last in a long line of farmers. I spent my days trying to keep crows from scavenging our crops. Now I'm the scavenger. See his animal choice, it's thematic. There are going to be some attempts at symbolism or themes in this. Some are a bit more smack you in the face, and some may just be more surface. We shall see where it goes. There's a slight neo-noir tone to Rook's narration that sometimes really lands and sometimes is silly, but it lands more often than it doesn't. And if you appreciate that type of protagonist and tone, it will be welcome. There are also some moments that lead one to question basic things, like how many people are left on the planet, and how come so many of them can construct spaceships? Even if they don't end up entirely working, just being able to do that's a pretty big accomplishment. Maybe it's just common knowledge in the future. The first issue is spent establishing the stakes, the environment, and world building, and on Rook. You learn a lot of interesting things, and they're not spoon-fed to you. Not all of them. Some of them are presented just as small world details that you can then slot into the bigger picture. Lots of the details about how Rook's connection to the birds is changing him, how the world is reverting, and sometimes it's through text, but a lot of times it's through the art, as Rook walks through now dying fish flopping in mud that was clearly recently a river, things like that. The world is interesting and cool. There is a bit of a cool factor to this book. The outfits look great and give massive we're in a sci-fi dystopia energy. The corporation bad element, while there, is not overstated to the point that it feels tiresome, although it is something that some may feel is played out. Rook's backstory is well placed within the first issue and gives you enough about him to explain his motivations and some of his headspace. And they also utilize that time to explain a bit of the backstory of Earth as shown through him, and just the genesis of the planet and the trip to Exodus. Yes, biblical phrasing. You also get some hints as to why he was assigned the mask he was and the like. While issue 1 lays the groundwork, issue 2 raises the stakes. stakes and introduces more personal ties for Rook. Time of recording, the first 2 issues have been released. Some of the issues set up in the first one are dashed in issue 2 in a manner that feels a tad abrupt, but the interest factor in the War of the Wardens manages to shoulder a decent amount of the brunt of Rook having to pivot slightly. His core motivation remains the same, but there's a big thing that's taken away from him in 2 and they just move on from it pretty fast. The world building is strong here. You learn a lot through these issues, and miles will vary on whether or not it hooks you or not. But there is intrigue in these former wardens who have been abandoned now trying to make the most of their world. Well, some of them are trying to do that. The questions as to what would happen with people there are interesting, and there are others who are discussed but aren't really the focus, like Weatherman. The symbolism. There is symbolism here. It remains to be seen how it will play out and how much depth it will have or how much bearing on the story overall. There's a lot of deliberate naming at play. The planet is called Exodus, a seeming reference to the biblical book, as well as the more modern use of the term meaning a mass migration. They also employ some of the symbolism from the plagues of Egypt. You see a lot of the droughts and the rivers drying up. Haven't seen any swarms of locusts or the like yet, but the way the rooks and crows swarm around him is very much like that. He controls the entire core of his family. As Rook searches the city for alcohol to numb the presence of the birds in his mind, their hunger, and their impulses on him to do things like fly away or search for carrion, he marks the areas he's been with a big red X, which is very much reminiscent of the final plague. But it's just kind of there. So far, they haven't done much with it. So you just have rows upon rows of rooms marked with these X's as he's passed them over. Whether it'll get deeper than things like that or not remains to be seen. There is also the animals they control. Rook is called Rook, most likely because Crow and Raven were taken. But in all fairness, also Rooks have their own history. It's also a name of a chess piece, which is sometimes called a castle, both a supporting and oppositional piece. So again, we'll see if that comes into play. Now, there are other things that are just there. They're more meant to be, I think, cute nods, such as when he's traveling through the ruins of the city, all of the establishments he passes have bird names. There's also a lot of pun names about. Some are worth a light chuckle. So the world itself and the concept are decently interesting, but what about the characters? So far, the most important characters are Rook and Direwolf. We'll start with Rook, since Direwolf doesn't fully come in until issue 2 unless you read the sample from Ghostmachine 1. Rook is a bit of a flat protagonist. He's kind of worn down by all that's happened to him, and he's a bit cynical. As mentioned, he reads a bit like an old school noir protagonist, down to the drinking. Is he Max Payne? He's not uninteresting, but he's not the easiest to connect with. He has motivations and relationships with characters, but he's just in a bit of a down and out state of mind that may make him a bit less interesting to some, though that could change. There are some factors that have been placed that could make him wake up a little bit. As it stands, however, time of recording, the world is more interesting than him, and the way it works through him is what's fascinating. That's what's keeping him afloat. A lot of what does make him interesting is more kept to the background. The psychology behind how he came from a dying farm, how he was forced to leave Earth, and how that plays into him wanting to flee from his new dying world. There's a lot of questing for control with Rook. There are some questions surrounding him. There are just some blank spaces. We'll see if they get filled in or if there are things to fill them in with. He also is unnamed, but he knows Direwolf's name. I'm assuming she may know his name. When they join the company, they discard names, but they don't mention that in this issue, but they do mention it in the card blurb in Ghostmachine #1. I mean, I'd rather be called Rook anyway. It's pretty cool. Also, why can he just build a functional spaceship? I need to know. Direwolf has had some moments by herself, but has mostly been experienced through Rook. And as for her independent scenes, she's a bit cookie cutter as it stands. She looks super cool, and there's meant to be a past history of romantic tension between the two, but so far it hasn't really landed. Time of recording. Maybe it's the future and it's amazing. Rook X Direwolf. Hashtag Rookwolf. Direwolf trained all the wardens and is both loyal to the company and attached to the world of Exodus as their home. She's a no-nonsense chick who gets things done. She's meant to be a bit more of an optimistic counterpoint to Rook, or so it seems. And also she's just there to have a cape and a little boob window and a cool wolf mask. Less is known so far about Ursa, the villain as it stands, whose humongous genetically modified bears are killing other wardens. He himself is not a warden, but stole one of their helmets to control the bears. The shots of the bears are so over the top. They're pretty amazing. Just the attack bears, they're cool. There are some Mad Max vibes to this at moments, not in a bad way, but there is a notable influence at points. Not enough to render it derivative, but enough to see that some influence has been pulled. There's also some Lord of the Flies in there, but Rook even mentions that one out loud. So far, the world is elevating the characters, but they have space to get more interesting. Rook is halfway there already. It will really depend upon how it goes. The concept itself is also a bit stronger than the individual plot beats, which are fairly basic. Gotta get off the planet for Rook, so he's doing things that will potentially place him in a direction to get there. gotta save the planet for Direwolf. It remains to be seen how all that will be built out. As far as dialogue goes, the characters sound different in terms of the fact that they have different outlooks. So Rook wouldn't say the same thing as Direwolf or Swine would say, and vice versa. Although it can at times be clunky when handling exposition. Which sounds like a little thing, but it's a big deal. I've read works where everybody sounds the same and it's a nightmare. The art. It's a beautiful book. It just looks fantastic. All the little details in the world, the character and costume design, the action scenes, it's dynamic and fun, and there's clearly care here. It also strives to make use of the comic medium. Not as much as it could, but more than some works do, especially those with an eye to adaptation. Not to say this doesn't have that, there's a whiff of that here, but it's also embracing the medium it's in. There are some ways that the panels are laid out, or the scope of some things that are just far easier to accomplish in the comic book medium. Rook Exodus has been an enjoyable and interesting comic experience so far. There are some intriguing threads and paths that could be gone down. We'll see if it goes for them, or if it goes for the more traditional plot beats and leaves those things to the side. The pacing is decent and the passage of time easy to follow. For me, I'm really hoping they explore the idea of the connection between the animals and the wardens, the way that it appears to be altering them. Rook describes feeling distant, scattered, hungry, filled with instincts that aren't his. They're brief moments, but they interest me a lot. Also, the scars on their faces, are those from the animals attacking them during training? I want to know more about this aspect of it. But even if they never went there, which would sadden me, there is the potential for a solid story. Also, this word has come up several times. There's a cool factor to this work. They're just things, if you describe them, they just sound cool. So there are giant bears with gunners mounted on them running around. You've got these neat looking tech helmets that control animals who are also in some cases giant and mutated on a ravaged world fighting to survive. If you like sci-fi and are intrigued by micro shots of space operas, this may be up your alley. It reminded me a bit of some types of adventures they have in the Culture novel series by Ian Banks. Now, if sci-fi is not your thing, or if you're not down with evil corporations, or you want a more engaged protagonist, or just if what's described here isn't landing for you, or if you don't like the art, then this probably won't be for you. However, if this intrigues you and you're looking for a new sci-fi universe to potentially get stuck into, hopefully it takes off and goes for a while. You never know with these things. The entry price point is pretty accessible for a modern comic. It's $3.99, time of recording, and it's a nascent universe, so it's being built and evolving, and that can sometimes be a fun thing to be a part of, especially if the fandom is chill. I cannot vouch for whether the fandom is chill or not. If it sounds up your alley, check it out. I'm on the Rook Exodus train for now. What about you? Share your thoughts down below, and while you're down there, please do all the YouTube things: like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking this time today to spend discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.